Saddle hunters, our brothers over at Tethered continue to kill the game by releasing innovative products. They just recently put out the Eberhard Series saddle. They also put out the Menace saddle, which is for our Husky brothers and sisters that are into saddle hunting. That saddle will do just maybe a little bit better job of cupping your quote unquote assets. But the thing that I'm most excited about is their recent release of the Tethered One climbing stick. This thing is crazy light, crazy strong, and crazy quiet. I'm just going to cut to the chase here and give you some specs. Each stick weighs in at less than 1 pound. That includes your Dynalite rope attachment. A 3-pack of these will weigh in at 2.7 pounds, which is ridiculously light. It's a 17-inch step-to-step single stick height, and there's an 8.5-inch step footbed, which gives you plenty of room for those of us folks with bigger feet. It's all made with aerospace grade titanium and aluminum for construction. So if you'd like to learn more about Tether's innovative products, head over to tetherednation.com and check them out. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker, they're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Troops from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 203. Today we're coming to you live from the Rut Wagon for Rut Log number 2, so stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. I think it's Wednesday. I think I'm putting this out on Wednesday. I've kind of lost track of days here. I guess it's officially been 8 days, maybe for me. I think so. It feels like a month has passed by since I left home. But it's been a little bit of a crazy trip. I'm not gonna lie; these out of state trips always kind of end up being a little bit crazy. You never know what's gonna happen. Sometimes the hunting's good, sometimes the hunting's bad, and so I figured today I'm riding solo today. Zach had to take off. This is officially the end of my Missouri hunt. I'm recording this on Sunday morning because it's really the only time I'm gonna have, because I gotta pack up camp and head to the next state, the undisclosed location that I'm heading to. And it was time for Zach to get back to his family. Chad's actually grabbing one more morning hunt here before he heads back home for a couple of days, and then he and I will meet up in the next spot that we're headed to. So I figured I would take a quick second here and kind of catch everyone up. Apologies for not getting as many of these out as I had anticipated. I know I wanted to try to do roughly one every other day or so. It's been a grind, some long days, and the camper just really isn't conducive to being set up and recording every night and tearing down every night and stuff like that. So apologies for that, but hopefully I'll have a little bit more as far as updates go when we get to our next location. Partially because this Missouri trip here has been a little bit of a whirlwind, and I don't remember exactly when we did our last podcast and what update was part of that. But originally, I'll just kind of quickly go through the beginning of it. Originally we were hunting, really in the northeast part of Missouri. We were sticking relatively close to Iowa, for obvious reasons, and didn't have this whole trip is completely a freelance hunt. So I hadn't scouted, any of these places. Chad hadn't scouted any of these places. Zach is from Missouri, but he had never scouted any of these places or been to any of these places either. So this was all completely new terrain, new kind of habitat, like you name it. It was all brand new. We really needed to get to these, a piece and start to break it down. And the first place we got to was, I think we talked about it a little bit, was River Bottom. A lot of structure, but a lot of this piece was just really big, kind of like fallow. I don't even want to call it CRP, but just like nasty overgrown fields that would just like go on for, looked like miles. with some chunks of timber here and there. And so the setups were limited. There was a lot of pressure. And so in order to get away from the pressure, you were going to have very minimal setups. We ended up in the first like 2 or 3 days, I think it was, we found some really good sign. We felt like we were far enough away from people. It was probably about, I think Zach and I's hike in specifically was about 2 miles one way. We are, if the river was up, we had the ability to use the boat and use the river to get in and backdoor some access, which would have made it really, really easy. But the river's so low that we couldn't use, the boat was useless in this particular hunt or this, spot. So, which meant, a 2 mile hike in, every morning, which, isn't a big deal. It's all pretty much flat. But also the river access was going to be choice for, a couple different winds to get into a couple different locations. So, we ended up throwing a couple good hunts at that river bottom, and one setup we didn't see any deer, but man, it felt right and felt good. And we were on a hot scrape and just hammer rubs, big rubs. I think we even talked about, we met a guy there, Matt. Shout out to him from Wisconsin. He ended up getting on a big deer. I think I even mentioned maybe in the past podcast, we may have, after we spoke with him, Zach and I bumped a deer off of this scrape line on this bottom piece that we were hunting. Early in the morning, we couldn't tell what it was. It just sounded like a bigger bodied deer. It was a solo deer, and it just made, it was one of those things where when their feet hit the ground, you can kind of tell the difference between, a small deer, a doe, or what might be a buck just by, at least sometimes you can, by the sound they make as they kind of leave. And, we both kind of looked at each other and were like, that sounded like it was a solo deer. Like it could have been a big bodied, heavy deer. And then within 40 minutes, he was north of us. He ended up having an encounter with, and missed a deer that probably went about 160-ish. So, not knowing for sure whether or not that was the case, but it was just one of those things. It was very coincidental that it came from the direction we were at, and, directly from where we were essentially, and the timing kind of matched up to where, it made sense based on when we bumped him to when Matt had the shot opportunity. So that was that hunt. We ended up having that hunt. I think we even talked about it previously. We had an encounter with a good deer. Actually 2 good deer. I think we saw 5 deer that morning, and 3 of the 5 were bucks, but they were all just like screaming through, chasing does. Well, one was chasing a doe. The other one was kind of bird dogging, trying to find a doe. So it wasn't like we spent a lot of time with those deer. And so we got back to camp that afternoon and really just kind of made the call that, Chad scouted this, northern, I think it was the northern piece of this property. It might have been the southern. I don't remember exactly. He scouted the complete opposite side of this piece where we kind of knew that there was some doe bedding just from some intel we were gathering from some folks that were around camp or were leaving camp. He found a little bit of sign, but nothing too crazy. And, the action, what it seemed like from the folks around us was drying up a little bit. And so we felt like we needed to get to a place where we would have more room to roam and could, have an opportunity to break down a bigger piece of property to try to get away from people, because we were really kind of, based on the pressure that had been there previously, the pressure that was there while we were there, we really just had a small chunk of this property that we were going to be able to maybe, not even have to ourselves, but at least for the time being, have to ourselves. But, you spend a couple hunts in there and you're really kind of, that spot's kind of burned, and we had a week to spend. So at that point we figured, it was in our best interest to probably pull camp and move. So we did, and packed everything up. We made about an hour-and-a-half drive more to like central Missouri, still, in the northern part of Missouri, but central Missouri, and set up camp there. And, again, Zach and I got on sign. I think we all got on sign pretty quick. And, I think within 2 days, maybe, Zach and I had an encounter with a good deer, with 2 decent deer, either one, I think, on this trip, given it as a freelance hunt, wasn't going to be incredibly picky, as far as, size or maturity or anything like that. I was just looking for a good buck that would, get me excited. Essentially was what the criteria was. It wasn't like a inches mark or an age mark or anything like that. It was like, if the situation's right, it feels good, and it's a cool setup, and I'm excited about it, then we're gonna let an arrow fly. So we ended up having a decent encounter. We had great access on this piece. Essentially we had a creek bottom that we could walk. It was pretty dried up. It was a creek bed. And, we could basically use that for our access all along this creek bottom and stay pretty clean. And we found the first morning, or the first afternoon, actually, we were there. We found a couple hammer rubs up this ridge that were super fresh, like made that day, type of fresh, like that morning before we had got in there. So we set up on those immediately and hunted that afternoon, or I guess that might have been the morning. I don't even remember exactly. I guess it was the morning. And we set up on those and didn't see anything, and kind of moved off and scouted the rest of the day. And we had an evening set up somewhere that didn't produce. And so then we came back and we thought, maybe along that creek bottom, if we stay on the bottom part of the ridge, like these ridge systems all kind of ran into these drainages or these creeks, it seemed like, was kind of like how this land laid out. And what we kind of noticed when we got there, it was kind of hard to see on the map because we saw like some of these roads, but they weren't well defined. And we didn't know, I couldn't tell at least, are they like gravel access roads that people can kind of get to everything? Or are they just old 2-tracks that are showing up on the satellite imagery, and are they all kind of grown up? So wasn't exactly sure. But when we got there, what we realized is that there was basically gravel all around, that you could get to all these ridge systems, and you could park pretty much anywhere and walk down these ridges. And so there was just a ton of pressure at this place. I mean, every ridge top had a truck parked at it, and there was a guy hunting there, or 2 or 3 or whatever the case was. We talked to some folks who had been hunting that general area for years, and they even kind of made the comment that this was probably some of the most pressure that they've seen there, ever, and they've been hunting it for 15 plus years. So we ended up finding that one little spot to where, I think we drove by 4 places we had marked on the map the first morning, just drove by them because there were trucks parked there, and, you don't know where people are at, so you don't want to go in busting up somebody's hunt. So our criteria then became, we were just going to drive until we found a stretch of road somewhere, regardless of what the topography looked like, or regardless of what the habitat looked like. We were just going to drive until we found like a little clean stretch piece of road, that we could tell that there wasn't anybody parked there. Now, the kicker with this place is that these roads kind of wrap around these ridges. So even though you might be clean on one side, you go down to a creek bottom or to like a big draw and back up the other side of the ridges, there's another road that accesses the other side. So even though you're coming in that side, there could be somebody coming in from the opposite side of you. And so there was just access everywhere. But we managed to find a spot where, that creek bottom didn't really have any boot tracks in it. There were a lot of deer, deer tracks that were in there. We did, cut 1 or 2 buck tracks, nothing of substantial size. So that next morning, what we ended up doing was hunting the lower third of this ridge, because when we looked at it and when we did our scouting, these 2 ridges kind of wrapped, this creek bottom kind of wrapped around to the right if you were walking down the creek bottom, and the ends of those ridge tops, and I call them ridge tops, but they're not super steep. That those tops that basically dump down into the creek bottom are all crazy brushy. Like, it looked like at some point they had done some some timber stand improvement in that general area, so it was really brushy. And so when you looked at it, it was like, man, this looks like really good bedding. And the first morning we walked in there, we actually bumped the doe out of there, and it was as soon as we kind of entered it. And when we were walking the access down, from the top of the ridge was littered with scrapes, assuming those were all kind of tended at night. So one thing we did find out, I think we mentioned maybe on the last podcast, was we talked about hanging some cameras. What we did learn is we weren't able to hang cameras. We did a little investigation, and found out that, a lot of this land, depending on what it is, in Missouri, you can't use cameras. If it's conservation land, you can't use cameras. I believe if it's just like state public land, I think that you can, but, just to be safe, we weren't going to run any cameras after we kind of learned that bit of intel before we went out. So, there was no way to tell what's been hitting these scrapes or what's using them, what's passing through or whatever, which is another reason why, the criteria for what I was going to potentially want to shoot, I wasn't going to be terribly picky, because I don't really have a ballpark idea of what's in the area, other than based on what guys the guys I run into at camp and stuff like that, tell me from, historical information and stuff like that, or what I've visibly see myself, or the sign that I see, if it'll indicate, what the caliber of deer might be. So we went in that morning and set up about a third of the way up this ridge near what we assumed to be doe bedding because we found some does in there. And I don't remember what time it was. It was not. It was pretty soon after daylight. We had two bucks kind of running a doe. The doe ran through. The two bucks came through. And it was the weirdest things. I'd never seen two bucks on a doe at the same time. And they stopped and kind of squared off and thought they might throw down. The one was clearly an older deer, good looking buck, and the other one was clearly a younger, submissive deer. And so he just kind of walked off. Never got a shot opportunity. We tried to call. We let them get like a little bit ways away from us to where they'd get out of potential eyesight because where they were standing, they were probably only about 40 yards from us. But there was just no shot, and I'm not shooting that far in the timber just in general. And we were waiting for them to try to come a little bit closer because there's we thought they may angle toward us. In hindsight, what we realized was, and it was hard to see when you were on the ground how much ground cover there was, is that we were probably 20 yards outside the game. We needed to be about 20 yards closer to that bedding edge, and then we would have had a shot opportunity. But it's hard to see that edge or that definitive edge whenever you're on the ground. Once you get in the tree, it became really clear where we needed to be, and we were just slightly outside of the game. So with that, that rest of that day was kind of a bust. After the morning hunt, we got down and just scouted a bunch more. Didn't see anything. I think the next day we went back in and hunted that same bedding area the next morning. Because now at this point, the temps, when we were at the first piece of public, we weren't having great weather, but we were, 50s. And one morning, I think it was even 27. So we caught just a little bit of like a day and a half or 2 days of cold weather. But once we went to this new piece, it was like forecast when we first got there was like mid 60s, and then it was going to be 70 the rest of the way. And I think, most of you out there probably experiencing this across the Midwest and even back home in PA. The temps have just been unseasonably warm. So, we kind of assumed morning hunts were going to be the priority. You're going to have the coolest temperatures at that point of the day. Afternoon movement was probably going to be limited. And, evening movement would probably start later than anticipated. So evening hunts, you're going to have to hug close to bedding as well to try to catch anything coming out, as the temps start to drop. We did think since we were hunting a creek bottom, it was cooler down there. We thought we might be getting a little bit more action earlier in the day based on it being a little bit cooler in that general area, but it just never came to fruition. So the next morning we ended up moving trees, about 20 yards closer to where we ultimately need to be. And nothing, so nothing, there was no play there. And so, we went back to camp essentially. I don't remember exactly what day this was, but, we had some other guys roll into camp that, use this particular parking spot for like the past 20 years, and they were going to have 10 to 12 guys. They had a big speaker system. We got to talk to them and stuff like that. Some good old boys. And, it's just one of those things where it's like we were kind of, grinding it out and stuff like that. And those guys, definitely throwing down on a deer camp style thing. And I'm probably more of a early to bed, early to rise type of hunter, I guess, whenever I'm on these out of state trips. So we thought it was probably in our best interest just to kind of move, let them have their fun, let them have their traditional setup. And we were either going to move just campsites, or we were like, if we're going to pack up and if we're going to shift and move, maybe we should just think about going somewhere else. And so we made some phone calls. Zach made some phone calls to some family in a particular part of the state that we were potentially thinking about, going to. And we got some advice from his cousin who had been hunting a general area, who his family owns a bunch of property around, this particular area. And he knew of some places that were just what he, considered to be really overlooked. He's hunted them in the past, had great water access, but not well known. And, the frame of reference he gave us was, during gun season, it gets hit pretty hard. But during archery season, there's really not many folks around here. And he spends a fair amount of time around this particular area, duck hunting and stuff like that. And that's kind of how he knows about it. And he's hunted it in the past too. So, we didn't have a better option at that point. So we were like, you know what, let's just head there. I think this was, I don't even know, maybe Friday. No, that would have been, I think, Wednesday. We packed up camp and headed this way. And we got here. A lot of it was going to be water access, which we liked. There was some parts to the north on this property that you could potentially get in through walking access. But it's going to be pretty gnarly. And when we looked at it on the map, it looks really thick. Looks like it's good. Looks like you can get into some secluded places where you can really only get in by boat. And we had a boat. So we got here the first night, like Wednesday night, and we were just like, you know what, let's just go out and scout and see what we can see. And we got in the boat, dropped Chad off at one spot, and then Zach and I boated to another area. And this is the craziest thing. So we get in, and I mean, we're not even in the timber, I don't even know, 30 minutes maybe, and get a text from Chad that he jumped a giant. And, I don't know how, you guys listen to this podcast often enough that, Chad's a good buddy of mine. Chad's killed big deer in the past. He traditionally hunts big deer. He usually has like a big deer that he has in mind that he's trying to kill. When I say big deer, it's like a healthy caliber animal. And so when he sends you a text that he jumped a giant, it's not like he jumped a Pope and Young buck, or like a 125. Even though, look, I'm shooting that. But whenever he says there's a giant, it's what I immediately thought of was this is 150 class or better. I was like, holy smokes, it's like it was literally 20 minutes, and so he kind of looked on the map where that deer might go, and he was trying to figure out where he was going to set up. So, Zach and I are moving through the timber, and we immediately got in and found some really good rubs, some high rubs that we were like, all right, there's a good buck in this area. And then we ended up seeing a doe. And so, we're already in deer, and this place is just gnarly thick around this body of water. I mean, just like stupid thick. And so as we're making our way through, we kind of, it's like a combination of like really thick, just brush and greenbrier, blow down. There's some areas in here that are, you'll get into some cedar thickets and stuff like that. You get into some areas that are, just heavy kind of CRP, looking stuff with like these small, little like oak groves, white oaks still dropping acorns like out the wazoo. We're still dealing with hot temperatures, so now we're talking like we're hitting 70s every day now at this point, between 70 and like 73. So less than ideal. So Zach and I basically were walking through, and we got to this one part where there was a cedar thicket, and I was like, hey, let's walk up along this, edge of the cedar thicket and just see if we can start to see any scrapes or anything that were laid down. Because that's the one thing on this entire trip so far here in Missouri is that like the scrapes, like I found one like as soon as we got off the boat, like inside the timber, but I didn't see as many scrapes or as big a scrapes, or I don't think I ever found what I would consider a community scrape or a primary scrape, up against like bedding cover, which was just something for me that I was really kind of surprised by, because there were some areas we were walking through where I thought, man, like this would be a prime spot for that. Like this should be doe bedding here, there should be bedding right here. There's a couple rubs, like, man, there should be a primary scrape around here somewhere. And there was just couldn't come across one. So we're walking up along the edge of this cedar thicket, and, we're walking along the edge, kind of still hunting, scouting, and we get to the top near the private line, and we're just kind of looking around, and I was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to go to the bathroom real quick. I'm going to take a leak real quick while we're standing here. And I was like, because I want to go down to the bottom edge of this thicket, and I want to kind of work the edge of this entire thing to see if there's any scrapes or anything around here or anything worth looking at. So I'm going to the bathroom, and I just start to hear something run. Like in cedar thickets, they're great for cover, great for deer to hide in, but there's not really a whole lot of food in there. But in this area, there's just oaks right on the edge of it. So it's not like they got acorns everywhere. So, and when deer are walking through this, like there's no leaves on the ground, of course, right? And so they're super quiet. And so I just all of a sudden hear like some branches crack, and I look up in front of me, and there is a doe with another doe right behind her running like full tilt, all they got at me. Like they are, and I'm like, well, this means one thing, there's a buck behind it. So I'm literally going to the bathroom, have my, not going to be too vulgar or descriptive here, but you can imagine what I'm doing at the moment. And I'm just watching these deer run right toward me, and I'm kind of like, man, do they see me? Are they going to move? And then all of a sudden through the brush, I just see like 150 inches of antler just breaking branches as he's hauling ass toward me. And it's one of those things where I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm literally going to get run over by a 150-inch deer with my pants down, right? And at the last second, that doe, the first doe, sees me and cuts to the right, her right, and that buck follows her. Like, they came within 5 yards, maybe 3 yards, 3 to 5 yards of me. Like, I could have probably reached out and grabbed a handful of antler and rodeoed that deer. I mean, I would have got myself killed probably, but that is literally how close they were. They ran literally right in front of me. And I remember just looking at Zach with like my mouth wide open, like, did that just freaking happen? Like, that was a giant buck that literally almost ran me over. And so that was literally like the first, gosh, I mean, I don't know, maybe it might not even have been an hour that we were in the woods. So we had already found like a couple hammer rubs, this really great cedar thicket, a bunch of really good habitat, and a 150-inch deer. And Chad had just had seen one within 20 minutes of being in the timber. And so we all of a sudden were like, all right, we think we found a pretty good little honey hole here to spend some time in. And so, Zach and I ended up scouting the rest of that cedar thicket, some hammer rubs that were just like super fresh, shaving still on the ground, trees still wet. No doubt it was that bigger deer that probably made it in my mind, at least. And so, we marked that, of course, and just kind of kept scouting. We wanted to work this entire edge and get up to like this, up to the base of the property border, in the southern piece around this water. And so we kept kind of working our way through. We ended up kicking up a couple other deer, didn't see any other bucks. And then we ended up setting up in this draw that was just nasty thick. That was a really good setup. Ended up seeing a deer at like very last light, kind of walk through a doe, by herself. And so we were both pretty pumped about the prospects. I think it was Wednesday. Maybe that was Thursday. I don't remember exactly. That might have been Thursday. I don't recall. My days are getting all mixed up here. But anyway, fast forward, the next day, Zach and I went out. I don't remember where exactly we even set up on that hunt. But I don't think we saw anything that day. Maybe a couple does. Chad actually went to full draw on a deer. Actually released an arrow and missed a buck. He was probably about 130 inches is what he, estimated at. Just, misjudged the distance and let it rip and clean miss. And then yesterday, whatever day that was, Saturday, I think it was Saturday. Zach and I went out with the boat again, and we were like, hey, let's go to where those, I want to set up where those scrapes are, or where those rubs were at. It's like, it just feels like, deer are going to meander through there. Bucks are, there's CRP right behind us that's public. Then there's CRP above that is private. And then, there's, there's a cedar thicket on the left, on the right of you. Those rubs are in this one cedar thicket. Then there's an oak flat in between them, or like an oak draw in between them, and then a cedar thicket on the other side of the draw. And I was like, I really just want to set up in there because I was like, behind us, we had a southeast wind. And if we set up on, I guess it'd be the east side, up against the east thicket, the inside edge of it, our wind, if we set up close to the private line, there's a kind of like an open area there that is of no value, really. I think it's a pasture or an old pasture, all fenced off, private. I was like, if we set up close to the property line, our scent should kind of cut the corner and blow out into that timber. And if anything wants to get downwind to check scent, wind us, they're going to have to expose themselves for a shot opportunity. And if they come from the east side, if they come from the west side, there's a big down tree, and that drainage is just like ridiculously deep and steep. I was like, I just don't think that they're going to go through that. I was like, I didn't see any trails that were crossing it or anything like that. So I was like, if we set up here, like, we should almost be bulletproof from getting winded. And, we'll have shooting down to like where the draw kind of flattens out a little bit, or that drainage flattens out a little bit to where I think where deer are going to cross. And so that was our game plan the night before. So we got in there nice and quiet. The only thing that we should have done previously when we were in there that we didn't do is we should have, just while we were there, pick out the tree we wanted to get into.
Um, but I think probably just because we were seeing big sign, got excited, didn't think about it, and didn't pick the tree. So when we got in there in the morning, it took us a minute to find the right tree um, to get into, and then after we got into the tree, we're climbing up, and then all of a sudden, there was a deer in the thicket when we were starting to climb, so we had to chill out for a moment there, let her mosey on. I got most of the way up, had like my sticks basically set and was ready to set my platform. And then there was a buck that came out and walked within 10 yards. No, not at that point. There was another doe that showed up. We finally got into the tree and we weren't quite set up yet. And we just had legal shooting light. And there was a buck that walked, within 10 yards of the tree. Or I mean, exactly like we drew it up, like exactly where we thought they would come to. So we were able to hurry up, get set up, and tried to grunt him back in, but he couldn't hear us. We had a little bit of wind, and there was, when you're in those cedar thickets, man, it's like that sound doesn't travel very far in those places. Like it kills it pretty quick. And so then maybe I don't know, it might have been a half hour went by or something like that. I mean, because we saw that buck, I think shooting light was right around like 6:30 or something like that. So we saw that deer right around that time, and then right around, I don't know, probably 20 till 7 or 10 till 7, probably like 10 till 7. The reason we liked that spot is we could see the very edge of the CRP, and we were tucked in the timber. And while we're sitting there, we all of a sudden spotted a deer out in the CRP, and then all of a sudden we could tell it was a buck. And so I grunted at it, tried to get it to come in. It wouldn't come in. And so I grabbed my rattling antlers because I was like, I just need something that's going to be loud. It's like he needs to hear. If I'm going to draw him in, he needs to hear me, because it looked like he was going to cut the edge of that CRP or the edge of that cedar thicket and just kind of go out into this other adjacent CRP section. So I grabbed my antlers and cracked them together. And the other cool thing about this piece is that, man, the pressure was non-existent on this piece. Like, didn't see another person in the timber. We saw like an old ladder stand that was set up that was clearly set up to be a gun stand. And then we saw someone's climber that was back in this one corner. It was actually a pretty good setup. I mean, it would be a place that I would consider setting up. But that was really it. Like, there wasn't like a ton of like boot tracks. There wasn't like flagging tape. There wasn't anything like that. It was just like, one or two stands, and that was it. And so my thinking was, the previous places we had been, or at least the second place that we were, the deer didn't react positively to calling. The buck encounter that we had, when I called, it made them skittish. And so what that told me is that, yeah, given all this pressure, they're getting a lot of grunts, a lot of rattles, and a lot of bleats. And so they're hip to the game. They're not going to stick around when they hear that stuff. So knowing that there wasn't a lot of pressure on this piece, or assuming that there wasn't, I cracked the antlers together, and that buck's head ripped around and looked in that direction. I rattled him a little bit, gave him a grunt, and he was coming. Like, he wanted to know what that deer was. And so he came a little closer and stopped. I gave him another grunt, and he started working his way toward us. He wanted to know what that deer was. And so now I grabbed my bow, and he's walking in, and he looks like he's going to walk and give me a strong side shot. And I'm like, man, if he follows the path but in the opposite direction that deer did this morning, man, that's going to be like a 10-yard shot, and it's open. Like, there's just, that section of that drainage is like the best shooting opportunity like you could possibly ask for. Like, the deer just came through cover. There's no way they're going to see you. They're headed down away from you, slightly quartering, away shot. So his head will be pointed the opposite direction. He'll have plenty of time to draw, plenty of room to stop him. Like, perfect. Well, he gets to that point and makes a decision. And he starts jogging the other way. And so I recognized he was going to move the other way because he wanted to get downwind, or try to get downwind of whatever deer that was making noise, because it's so thick in there. He wasn't going to be able to see to the other side of that draw, or the other side of that drainage. So he starts working his way like to try to get downwind, and he was never going to wind us and bust us. So that wasn't the concern. But that side, I had, when we were in the tree, when we were thinking about where the shooting opportunities were, I was like, I got 2 shots here to my weak side, and then I've got a ton of shot opportunities to my strong side, which is why I set up the way I did, anticipating the deer were going to come from there or make their way down through there. So he's getting ready to pass through those two windows, and he stops right before that. So I'm now at full draw, waiting for him to make a move. And, I think I was at full draw for, I don't know, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, something like that. Feels like an eternity, right? You're like, just please make the last couple steps. I don't want to have to let down and have to redraw and do all that moving without getting picked off. And the other thing was too, where we were set up, like he was coming in a little higher, because we were just down off the edge of that drainage just a little bit. And so we weren't at eye level with him. We were still up above him, but it was, it wasn't ideal necessarily, put it that way, to get drawn until, unless he was behind some brush. And so he starts to make his move. And as he's making his move, he hits the shooting window, starts quartering slightly away, still great shot opportunity. And I mouth bleeded him to stop him. And then he hit the second window. So it was like he passed the first window, when I mouth bleeded him, and he took one more step and stepped into the second window, because there's basically like some brush, a window, a tree, and then another window. And so I held my pin on him. It was probably, 15-ish yards, and let it rip and hit him. He mule kick, jump, took off. I immediately could see that there was arrows sticking out of him, which at first I wasn't too concerned with, because he was quartering away. The way he had his kind of shoulders positioned, I was like, I got in behind that front shoulder, and I'm almost positive I hit the offside shoulder, which is, quartering away shot is what you want to do. You want to aim for that offside shoulder and try to jam it through the lungs and hit that offside shoulder and bust it up, and maybe get a pass through. But if nothing else, you bust that shoulder up, and he's not going to go far. And felt real good about the shot. It was placed it well. Thought it was a hammer hit. Looked like if you replayed it in your mind and you looked at it, it was like, man, that's a dead deer. We gave it some time, I don't know, we probably sat in the tree for an hour. When he busted out of there, like he took off, and then he started jogging right, and then jogged a little bit left, and it was so thick in there, it was hard to tell exactly where he went. And then he just went completely quiet. And so I thought he hit the open grass, like somewhere, right? Or he went along the edge of the cedar thicket near where that pasture was at, and then dipped down into the other side of the cedar thicket, which probably wouldn't really hear him from that distance at that point, and there's no leaves in there necessarily to hear either, him crunching through. So stayed in the tree for a while, probably like an hour or so, and then started climbing down, and we were like, let's just, go to where the impact was and see, if we can find blood there, and start just kind of trilling them. And then let's look at the blood and try to determine what kind of blood it is, how good is the blood, and then make a decision from there whether or not we're going to continue to track, or if we need to back out for a little while or what. But, we thought for sure at the end of the day we were going to have, a dead deer. And we started looking at the impact site, and there wasn't any blood, which wasn't crazy, because the shot was just a little bit high, but well within, the kill zone. I did get it on a camera, so I was able to go back and look at the footage and see where it landed. And so that just confirmed, I was like, okay, that felt good. The release felt good. Placement was a touch high, but should be in lung, and it looks like I hit the offside shoulder, so we should be in business. And started tracking, and just we're not finding any blood just in that general area. And we finally started finding just like a little bit, just like very little bit, and started kind of making our way through, and found the arrow where it came out, and I got probably 9 inches of arrow in it, and he broke it off. So we marked that spot, and we were just like, what, let's back out of here, and just give it some time. It might be a single lung, it might have got single and then clipped the second or whatever, so we spent, whatever it was, just probably an hour, maybe hour and a half looking in that general area, just making sure to try to find, like, which way did he exit? Like, which way did he go? Like, so we know where to pick up the trail. And we just weren't able to find anything right in that specific spot. So we ended up backing out, and we were like, let's just give him some time. It's not, he could be bedded really close, so let's just get out of here as quietly as we can, and then we'll come back. And so that's what we did. We ended up calling some of Zach's buddies that, to potentially come out and help us track. Zach and I ended up going back in, did some more looking, trying to figure out, like, can we find blood on the edge anywhere? I mean, we gave him a couple hours at that point, and try to go along to see if we could find blood on the edge anywhere. Couldn't find any blood on the edges. We walked, just the edges. We didn't want to get too far into the CRP and stuff like that because we didn't know if he was potentially bedded in that, and we wanted to give him plenty of time and without trying to push too far. But we were just trying to find like a starting point to where we're going to potentially, have an opportunity, just trying to figure out the trajectory, like what direction he went. You know what I mean? Because we lost him in the timber, we couldn't see him any longer, so we don't know exactly where he exited. And without the blood, it's like he could have went any number of ways. So we spent some time there looking, and we ended up boating back out. And we waited for Chad to wrap up his hunt. We had a couple guys come in. Zach and I drove to the private land owners in that general area and got permission to walk on their property to look for this deer. We sent some images to some trackers to consider bringing in a dog and get their opinion on what the likelihood of recovering this deer was. They gave us some good information and basically came out and told us that, hey, I'll bring a dog out. He's like, but he's like, I don't think you're going to find that deer. He's like, and he really just, I don't want to say didn't necessarily want to do it, but he was being real honest. As he looked at it and got the opinion of some of his buddies, he felt like it was high shoulder, kind of in no man's land, and that it likely, wasn't a fatal hit. So that was that with the dog. So we weren't able to get a dog out. And then, so we went back out last evening late. And at that point, that deer would have had, however many hours, close to 12 hours to lay down. And we went back out and grid searched, all the access or all the public that was around there, a couple of the drainages that were there that he could have possibly ran into. We were never able to find an exit route. We were never able to find blood where he maybe ran, into CRP or, even exited the timber. We grid searched all the CRP that was there, grid searched the South CRP, the North CRP, the drainages that were all in the timber that was to the east, the drainages and timber that was to the west. Grid searched all the private that we got access to. And in fact, Zach's cousin, knew the other private landowners, and we were that were even adjacent to the two that we got permission from. And we were able to extend the search onto those private pieces, or that private piece, which was a pretty decent sized chunk, and probably spent 12 plus hours searching for this deer after the shot yesterday, and found not a single additional drop of blood and came up empty. So it's it's a bummer end of the story. I mean, yesterday was the last day of the hunt. Last year, if you recall, in Iowa, it took me to the last day to get the job done, and it had a happy ending. And this one does not. Doesn't sit with me well. You never want to hit an animal and not recover it. Truthfully, this is a new experience for me, to be honest. In the past, I've either missed them clean or recovered them. And so this is the first time I've had a deer where I thought I hit well and never found it. So it's a pretty sickening feeling. Look, I know you do this long enough and you bow hunt, long enough, it's eventually going to happen to you. It happens to everybody at some point. And if, if you're one of those folks like me who, was like, well, it's never happened to me yet. It's like, just give it time. And I don't like saying that. It's not like, you don't wish this on anybody or anything like that, because it's a pretty shitty feeling. But it just kind of comes with the territory. Everything felt good, did everything I could do to try to find that deer. My belief is I don't think that he's dead. I think as much as we searched yesterday and everywhere that we went, I think we would have found him. You know, I think he's going to end up. I think he's going to be a little sore, and end up living, especially after talking to the trackers. But it doesn't make it any easier to leave and walk away. It's not about whether or not I fill my tag or not. It's just more about, you don't want to wound something. You don't want to have that animal be hurt or end up taking a couple days to die or be injured and end up yotes getting them or whatever the case is. So it's pretty low feeling, man. Not gonna sugarcoat it. Feel like shit, and didn't sleep well last night. But I know that it's part of it. It happens. Plenty of buddies that I know have had it happen to them and stuff like that. But it still doesn't make it any easier to swallow. So the net is I just need to, was taken today to kind of pack up camp to get ready to head to my next location. Also probably mentally needed a day just to kind of come to terms with, everything that transpired yesterday. Give myself a day to pack up camp and head off to the next state, lick my wounds, and put on my big boy pants and get back after it. And that's what I'll do. So, it's I tell you what, man, these travel hunts out of state, DIY, freelance, we hit 3 states and not 3 states. We hit 3 sections of public, all an hour and a half away from each other, completely different habitat in each section in 7 days, actually 6 days, actually fewer than that because it was, I guess it was Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah. So within 5 days, we hit 3 different chunks of public land that were all an hour and a half, basically an hour and a half drive from each other. Or more, actually. I think the first one was almost 2 hours. The first move was almost 2 hours. So, it definitely put to the test some mental fortitude, to grind through and push through, because every day was a lot of miles. It was almost felt like we were Western hunting for whitetails because every day was just logging miles and scouting, hot weather, deer not moving. And so you're really having to find where they were at. It was really kind of strange for a rut hunt, to be honest. But the thing is that every piece we went to, we were able to get on deer, on bucks within, shooter bucks within, 2 days. Each time we moved, or the first time we got to the first place we were at. And then each time we moved after that, it took us basically, within the first 24 to 48 hours, we were having encounters, which is just super rad, man. And I just urge anyone out there that's listening that if it's something you've considered doing, I'd say go do it, man. It's awesome. I mean, you learn so much. You have so many growth opportunities and experiences when you do these type of hunts. They will humble you quickly. As high as those highs are, whenever you find that sign or you have that encounter or whatever, there are those days and those times where it's like where you question whether or not you know what the hell you're doing. There were times where we're walking and we're just like, like, goodness, I cannot find deer sign that I want to set up on to save my life, and then all of a sudden your fortunes change just like that, and then for me, you get the shot opportunity that you've been working for 6 days, grinding, and then, and it just doesn't come to fruition, which is a pretty tough pill to swallow, but it's good learning lessons. This is one of those things that that I'll kind of take with me on future hunts. And as I stand here right now, it's like I don't know exactly what I'm taking from it yet because it's still so fresh and so kind of raw that I'm not sure what the positive takeaway from it is. Because the positive takeaway isn't necessarily some self-fulfilling type of takeaway where it's like, I'm going to be better at X because of it, or I'm going to be a better human or whatever because of it. It's not that like higher order, if you will. It's, I think, tactically, I think I need to look at it about how I executed the shot. And not necessarily the shot, but if I had to take, okay, I'll do this. The immediate takeaway is, this is actually it. This is the thing that I need to work on. You guys are getting this in real time. So if this is, sorry, if this is a little bit of stream of consciousness. When I target shoot, or I'm practicing in the off season, and I've talked to my buddy Johnny Utah about this, and he's warned me of this, so shout out to him for that. And I've tried to break myself of it, but it's hard for me to do because I'm not a super anal perfectionist, but there's certain things I'm really, really particular about. And one is shooting. I shoot a lot. And I try to be really, really fine when I shoot, target, right? And I think what part of the problem is that I try to be so precise when I practice shoot, when I'm target shooting and stuff like that, that I'm constantly trying to pound the X, if you will, right? Whenever I'm practicing at home, or, if I'm shooting my 3D target, it's like I'm constantly trying to heart shot or slip the arrow in, like right behind the crease of the shoulder, like perfectly, right? At whatever range and at whatever angle, right? That's my goal. And if I can't do it, I get a little upset about it. And I'll just keep doing it until I finally get it. And so I've talked to John about this in the past, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, he had mentioned to me, I think it wasn't on the podcast, I think it was off air, that he used to do the same thing. And what he was finding was that he was giving himself no margin for error on a live animal shot, because he was trying to be so fine that if he was just a little bit forward, like if he was back a little bit, he was good. But if you're just a little bit forward, you were either hitting shoulder or you were in no man's land. And this is the first time that's happened to me. Last year I had a couple misses that were clean misses for, one, rushing a shot, two, clipping a branch, and then finally sealed the deal. But this was the first time where trying to be too fine and be too perfect, instead of not making a target shot, but making a kill shot, bit me in the ass. And I started trying to work on this some this year, and I obviously needed to spend more time with it, is I need to practice at taking kill shots and not being so hung up on, like, I don't want to say perfect arrow placement, because that's what we always want. We want a clean, ethical kill. So don't take this the wrong way. I'm not saying, like, don't aim for, like, the perfect kill shot or the best kill shot. But in a real life setting in the woods and the timber, when you're dealing with brush and you're trying to slip it between a branch and a tree or whatever the case is, because those are the shots you're going to have, especially if you're hunting thick areas and in and around bedding, like you're, on public, like you can't cut limbs, you can't do that stuff. So it's like, you got what you got. Is that I need to do a better job of, in the moment of, I don't want to take center mass shots, but giving myself a forward margin of error and pulling my arrow back a little bit. Because if that arrow yesterday was back, if I didn't try to, jam that into the perfect spot, and I was back 2 inches, complete pass through, totally different story, right? And so that is the takeaway for me. Like, that's the thing that I need to work on tactically, that I need to work on. I'm being too particular about it, and maybe I'm beating myself up about it, too much, but I don't think that I am. I mean, it's an animal, and you want to be as ethical and as quick as possible. But that's the thing that I need to work on. Like, I need to make kill shots and not target shots whenever I'm in the woods, and that's on me, and I need to fix that. So with that, I've been going on here for a little while. Thanks for listening to me, give you the stream of consciousness, giving you the play-by-play. I'll try to get some more of these out here in this next week. I'm not sure how much more time I'm going to have. Actually, the internet access for me is going to be even more remote than it was this past week in this next location that I'm headed to. And hopefully we've got some better outcomes. We got some good deer on camera in this particular area on this piece of public that we're headed to. So things are looking good. Looks like we're going to have a little bit of a turn in weather here starting, early part of the week, ish, or probably about the time you're listening to this on a Wednesday. So feeling good about those things. And, I'm sure the drive, the drive will, be therapeutic for me and help me get back in the right, the right headspace to finish out the grind for the next week. And, hopefully filling some tags. So with that, I hope you guys are finding success in the timber. I hope you're enjoying this time of year. I know the weather's not great, but just get out and enjoy the deer movement, whatever, however heavy or light that might be, and just enjoy some time in the timber and have some time with your thoughts. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.